Good afternoon. I welcome everyone at the press center of the Ministry of Foreign Affairs. At our weekly briefing, we have both Russian and foreign correspondents, and we will start with the schedule of the Minister of Foreign Affairs of Russian Federation, Mr. Lavrov. On August 23rd, Minister of Foreign Affairs of Russian Federation will participate in the work of the 10th All-Russian Educational Forum Territory of Meetings, which I'm reminding you will take place at the Sinej Management Lab in Solnechnogorsk, Moscow region, where he will address the young forum participants, address the priorities of the foreign policy of Russian Federation, steps to enhance cooperation with EAU, CSTO, CIS, SCO, and BRICS, perspectives of preserving the heritage of the World Youth Festival, and also answer the questions of the participants of the forum. So a very interesting, heated discussion is expected. The 10th All-Educational Forum serves as a platform for communication between highly motivated, talented young people from different countries ready to contribute to strengthening of direct contact between Russia and other countries. And we attach great importance to increasing contacts with the young generation, as well as instilling in them the high moral values. And speaking of the organization that I've already spoken about, BRICS, I don't think anyone needs a reminding that 2024 is especially important for our country. This is the year of our chairmanship at the organization. And this chairmanship is entering its decisive stage. Over 130 events of different levels have been conducted on all the areas of cooperation: politics and security, economics and finances, cultural and humanitarian contacts. Within the political bloc, there have been a lot of meetings. First of all, BRICS ministerial meeting in Nizhny Novgorod, which took place from June 10th to 11th. During the meeting, there was also an extended session with participation of representatives of the Global South and East states, as well as countries chairing regional organizations: Bangladesh, Bahrain, Belarus, Venezuela, Vietnam, Kazakhstan, Cuba, Laos, Mauritius, Thailand, Turkey, and Sri Lanka. Between the foreign ministries on July 12th in Moscow, there have been consultations of the heads of the departments of information and press, where they welcome the perspectives of enhancing cooperation in order to popularize BRICS and strengthen its reputation. We're strengthening the coordination between the countries of the organization and international platform, first of all in the UN, and a very good example is the joint statement of the delegations of BRICS on the sidelines of the 6th UN Environment Assembly in Nairobi. An active work is being conducted in other areas. There have been sessions of the BRICS Council to combat money laundering and the financing of terrorism in April and June of this year. Anti-corruption working group of BRICS in April and June, the working group of BRICS on issues of security and the use of ICTs in April, counter-terrorism working group on July 22nd to 24th. At the end of the meeting of the working group, they agreed on the position paper with the recommendations for the further development of specialized cooperation. In Vladivostok, from June 17th to the 18th, there has been an international inter-party BRICS and partner countries forum with the participation of representatives of political forces of countries of the organization and developing countries. On July 11th to 12th in St. Petersburg, there was the 10th Parliamentary Forum BRICS. In the extended sessions were attended by the representatives of the CIS Interparliamentary Assembly, as well as the chair of the Interparliamentary Council and speaker of the National Council of Tanzania, Tulia Ackson. And the event showed the great interest and further strengthening of parliamentary cooperation in the organization. They signed the protocol to the Memorandum of Understanding on the BRICS Parliament Forum, as well as adopting a joint declaration. On the economic area, there has been a discussion of issues in supporting sustainable development. There have been a lot of meeting between the ministers of tourism, ministers of sport, ministers of environment, ministers of affairs of youth, ministers of economics and trade, ministers of industry, as well as the heads of the Supreme Courts, heads of the procurators' services, heads of the space agencies, and the emergency services departments. As a follow-up for the decisions of the Johannesburg Summit of BRICS in 2023, there have been possibilities of enhancing cooperation in order to assess risks, raising the stakes in national currencies, as well as investment actions. During the meeting of the Committee of High Representatives of BRICS on Energetics in February and July this year, there have been discussions of prospective areas of cooperation in the area of energetics, energetic security, technological cooperation, as well as exchange of best practices. In early April, there have been the first session initiated by the Russian chairmanship of the Contact Group of BRICS on Climate and Sustainable Development, during which we reaffirmed our interest in creation proposed by the Russian side of the BRICS Climate Research Platform. At the meeting of the Ministers of Agriculture of the BRICS countries, which took place on June 28th, Russian initiative was proposed to our partners on creating a platform on selling grain, which is aimed at ensuring agricultural security of the countries of the organization and of the developing countries. We attach great importance on enhancing the partnership of BRICS in the healthcare area. On February 13th and March, there have been the first session of the Working Group of BRICS on Nuclear Medicine. On March 27th, the meeting of experts on launching the complex system of early warning of the risk of mass infectious diseases. On June 20th, 21st in St. Petersburg took place the first forum of nuclear medicine. BRICS countries. On July 18th, 19th, Rospotrebnadzor held the International Conference of Biothreats and Pathogens, BRICS Response. Among other serious results, after the first meeting of ministers of transport on June 6th, there was a reached agreement on launching a regular mechanism of cooperation in the area of transport during the first session of the heads of geological services, which took place on July 15th, 17th. They've discussed the perspective of creating a geological platform of BRICS. Traditionally, high importance is paid to the issues of cultural and humanitarian assessment and cooperation. It's in this area that there has already been the International Film Festival of BRICS countries from April 19th to 23rd, Academic Forum from May 22nd to 24th, Civil Forum from July 3rd to 4th, and other events with the participation of experts, representatives of the civil society of our country, and of course of cultural figures. From 12th to 23rd June in Kazan, for the first time in an open format, there have been the sports games of BRICS, where athletes from over 19 countries took place, and the sport programs oversaw over 27 types of sports. And the true cherry on top of our chairmanship in BRICS will be the summit, which will take place in Kazan from 22nd to 24th October. We will continue the tradition of organizing it, the extended session with the leaders of leading developing countries in the format of outreach or BRICS Plus, and we expect that with the active support of the partners, the Russian chairmanship will lead to practical results and will heavily contribute to strengthening the positions of BRICS on the international arena. And another announce from the 27th to the 30th August, UFA will host the 6th Forum of Young Diplomats of the BRICS countries, which will be conducted together with the plan of events of the Russian chairmanship. And the main theme will be the role of young diplomats in strengthening the multipolarity and just global development and security, organized by the Council of Young Diplomats of the Ministry of Foreign Affairs together with the Fond Roscongress and the government of the Republic of Bashkortostan. The event is aimed at strengthening the cooperation between youth, their friendships and trust between the countries of the global south, the east, between the peoples, the nations. Delegates who are expected to visit will have a very busy program, both of business affairs and cultural affairs. The main themes will be the international, cultural, humanitarian, as well as youth cooperation on the BRICS space, the role of youth in international political and financial economical system. It's expected that over 110 delegates from over 30 countries will participate. During the events, there will be meetings with the heads of Minister of Foreign Affairs of Russia and Republic of Bashkortostan, leading politicians, economical experts, public persons, winners of Olympics and the BRICS Games, as well as the chance to get to know the history and culture of this region of Russia. And there will also be the ceremony of initiation for the new members of the International Associations for the Young Diplomats, which was created in 2017 in order to strengthen the cooperation between the youth of ministers of foreign affairs. And as for today, there are over 150 diplomats. Another interesting event within Russia's BRICS chairmanship. The Agency of Strategic Initiatives, together with the Platform of National Technological Initiative of the Trade and Industry Chamber of the Russian Federation, will hold the competition of the best technological advances and practices of BRICS countries in different areas. And the name is the BRICS Solutions Awards. It's been held annually since 2020 in the chairing country of the organization. The main goal of the competition is to develop a system of independent, multipolar cooperation. In this regard, it's especially important to develop new technologies that answer to the demands and interests of the BRICS countries. The participants will propose projects in 8 nominations: new industry and energetics, biotechnologies and the health of the nation, sky, space and communication technology, artificial intelligence and digital services, climate and ecological technologies, platforms and complex decisions for the state and public management, competencies and development of personnel. We have already received applications from Brazil, Egypt, India, China, and South Africa. The most popular was the nomination New Industry and Energetics, followed up by the Platform and Complex Decisions for the Government and State Management. You can apply up for the 30th August of this year, and of course the link to the website we will attach to the text of today's briefing. Finalists and winners will be invited to the ceremony of the Business Forum BRICS, which will take place in Moscow in October 2024, and the information on the winning projects, of course, will be published on the resources of the organizers and the partners of the competition. And of course, we're closely following the activity of all the countries who are speaking about their desire to join the BRICS organization, who are ready to join the work of the organizations. And here there are a lot of questions on that. I can't comment on each application, on each statement that have been numerous lately, because there is a very high interest. But I'd like to mention the basic approaches to the issue of new countries, new member countries joining the BRICS organization. We attach great respect to the sovereign desire of countries to enhance their cooperation of BRICS. We understand this position. The doors of BRICS are not closed, and the organization is devoted to strengthening connections with the representatives of the global majority. Right now, over 30 countries have spoken of their interest to building systematic cooperation with BRICS, and I believe this perfectly demonstrates the good side of the principles that are used to participate in this format. And I believe you know these principles: mutual respect, balance of interests, and the consensus. Taking in line the decision of joining on January 1st, 2024 of new members, we attach great importance to their harmonic integration to all the mechanisms of strategic partnership, while preserving the dynamics and effectiveness of our cooperation. After the decisions of the meeting of the leaders of BRICS in Johannesburg from August 22nd to 24th last year, we're agreeing on the modality of establishing new category of state partners, as well as adding the list of potential candidates. And the results of this work will be proposed to leaders of the summit in Kazan on October 22nd, 24th. Once again, I'd like to remind you that there will be an extended session in the format of Outreach BRICS Plus at the summit, where leaders of a large group of leading developing countries will be present, and we believe this will be a great opportunity to discuss the relevant issues of the international agenda while forming new, more just world order, strengthening the cooperation of BRICS between the global South and East, and strengthening their role in the international processes. And drawing this theme to a close, I would like to speak in contrast about the bloc discipline. Why in contrast? Because BRICS is a union which, as I've already mentioned, was formed and is being formed based on principles such as mutual trust, consensus. There is no place for dictature, for dictators, no administrative totalitarian practices of control. Meanwhile, there is another approach to building international affairs, the bloc AUKUS, which initially was a very harmful idea, and its development as a boat component is only further proof to that. Project AUKUS is not just a military technological platform. I'd like to point out that this is a bloc basis for ensuring constant presence of NATO in the Asia-Pacific region for the far-reaching consequences for the stability and security of the region. For the same tasks are working other organizations created by the Westerns of the small geometry or the Indo-Pacific Quartet, Japan, Australia, New Zealand, South Korea, participants of which are expressing high interest in joining AUKUS based on this bloc format. The three-party Anglo-Saxon alliance is a systematic element of different multilateral and military political tracks branded under the American concept of the so-called Indo-Pacific region. And among the participants of these forums are the official representatives of NATO. Destructive schemes of such kind objectively work against the peaceful development of constructive cooperation that has been accumulating over the decades, which always based on the architecture of ASEAN-centric mechanisms of stability, security, and cooperation. Evidently, in order to serve their own interests, countries participants of AUKUS operate based on the principles everything for ourselves and the rest will follow the law. So it's not nothing based on the consensus, but it's the rules-based world order. And all this serves their own interests, their own obligations on the nuclear non-interference. The partnerships question the Australia's obligations within the creation of the zone free of the nuclear arms in the Pacific Ocean, or the Agreement of Rarotonga, and Australia's actions undermine the trust towards the idea itself of creating a zone free from the nuclear arms. And concern in this area comes from the experts of those countries who participate in the AUKUS. People understand more and more that the serious geopolitical threat could emanate into a serious threat to international peace and security. And when we speak on what tracks, what paths the world could develop in the future, I believe that this is a perfect example on how cooperation between the countries could build either on mutual respect, understanding of mutual interests in the effectiveness of peace, security, or using examples of the past. all kinds of wars, aggression, hidden and enshrined under the shield of so-called constructive peace initiatives that are not that.
Basically, the result of the second track, second ideology, was the deep-rooted crisis that we witness in Ukraine. The Kiev regime seeks justification for its terrorist foray in the Kursk region, tries to find new pseudo-arguments, one being more absurd than the other. They don't even care whether one argument is at odds with the other. All the atrocities made by the Ukrainian armed forces are something that they try to conceal. For starters, the officials on the Bankovo Square tried to ponder over some kind of a task to strengthen negotiating positions of Kiev, although they don't quite understand who will negotiate with them after these atrocities that they launch against civilians, against civilian infrastructure and facilities. And once again, let me highlight it. This is something that was raised by the Russian leadership. This attempt of the Ukrainian armed forces to invade our territories from the outset makes it impossible to have any negotiations with the bandit junta, but they still try to impose their ideology to the international community. But that lasted not for a long. After that, Zelensky cynically claimed that Ukraine tries to create some kind of a buffer zone in the Russian region. Nobody among American, French, Italian journalists tried to clarify how one adds to the other. Are you going to set up a buffer zone or to strengthen your negotiating positions? Apparently, Zelensky uses this address to the people to increase his popularity that is plummeting and to increase the funding from Western donors. And certainly these statements are contradictory, and this criminal plan by the Kiev regime was initially doomed to fail miserably. Meanwhile, the collective West, led by the US, instead of expressing sympathy to women, children, elderly that suffered from the Ukrainian armed forces, continues to actively support the Kiev regime in different ways. Some provide more funds to the Kiev regime for terrorist activities of the Kiev regime, of its officials and those who are the rulers in Ukraine. The others are openly praising terrorist attacks that have been committed. It's not quite clear how it is in line with many laws and myriad legal acts that ban them from funding and supporting terrorist attacks. Take a look at that. Prime Minister of Poland, Donald Tusk, on the 14th of August, went as far as saying that the Kiev regime criminal activities in the Kursk region are defensive, and he recognized that Kiev was entitled to wage a war in such a way as to paralyze Russia as efficiently as possible. How is it in line with the idea of George Bush Jr. That was voiced by him during the conversation with the pranker, that the task of the Kiev regime is to kill as many Russians as possible? There's some kind of a right of the Kiev regime to defend without any restrictions using Finland-supported weapons was raised by the president of this country, Alexander Stubb. There are no geographic limits to use weapons supplied to the Kiev junta, and that is something that was said by Press Secretary of the Defense Ministry of Canada. On the 19th of August, Denmark Foreign Minister Lars Løkke Rasmussen, in his interview with the media, basically gave a green light to the Ukrainian Nazis to use Danish weaponry to strike Russian territory. By doing so, Western leaders basically approved murderous crimes, terrorist attacks committed by the Kiev regime against civilians. On top of that, members of the Kiev regime continue to pursue their maniac desire to inflict a strategic defeat upon Russia at all costs. According to Western media, British ministers try to convince NATO allies that it is necessary to allow the Kiev regime to strike Russian territory using cruise missiles Storm Shadow with up to 250 kilometers range. Reportedly, President Biden is open to sending cruise missiles, joint air-to-surface standoff missile, to Kiev. Their range is up to 400 kilometers. Allegedly, Pentagon is working to launch such a lethal weapon from F-16 fighters. Public encouragement of terrorist actions, including in the Kursk region, foreign equipment, military equipment, and mercenaries in our soil showcase vividly that Western allies in the Kiev regime are directly involved in the crimes of neo-Nazis. Against this backdrop, we do understand why Western media, for instance, the Wall Street Journal, started publishing articles that NATO countries, listing various posts and offices, allegedly they do not share intelligence with the Kiev regime on the targets in the Russian territory. Moreover, there are publications that allegedly the West didn't know anything about the plans of Zelensky, but clearly that is not true. These are fake news, these are misleading information, call it as you may. The thing is that the invasion into the Kursk region is taking place with the comprehensive support by the West, and it was authorized by it. The so-called information operations are used by Western media, and by doing so, NATO, including Anglo-Saxons, try to shun away from responsibility from the terrorist acts committed by the Kiev regime. Let me remind you that in the legal system of Anglo-Saxons, there are specific legal acts banning to sponsor terrorism. The sponsorship, support, encouragement of terrorism, it is all banned on an individual basis and collective basis with regard to states and so on. On top of that, these provisions and these definitions, this language is used by the West, and it has been using it for many decades in order to let themselves invade sovereign countries. I'm talking about supporting terrorism by anyone. And this was the fact that gave them the green light and allowed them to breach the law. In order to distance themselves from obviously clear terrorist acts of the Kiev regime, they use media to have an impression that they have nothing to do with the developments, but certainly that is not true. In this context, we drew the attention to the information in late July on the Ukrainian government's work on the bill on international defense companies. Basically, this law legalizes private military companies with foreign engagement. Reportedly, these proxy entities plan to be registered solely in the territories of regions that border our country. If approved, this document will enable NATO countries to send F-16 fighter pilots to Ukraine without any direct involvement in the conflict. Basically, the same old story. First, they use the Kiev regime and Ukraine as a tool. Then they make their utmost to change the law of Ukraine, to hide themselves, to conceal their actions. Should it be implemented, this new form of accomplishing by the West in the criminal activities of Kiev will only prompt further escalation of the conflict. We do not rule out that Ukrainian neo-Nazis consider this law as a green light to use private military companies in Africa and other regions of the global south. Let us warn you that all foreign combatants that are carrying out terrorist attacks against our regions, just like the military equipment of theirs, are legitimate targets of the Russian armed forces, and they will be destroyed. The domestic legislation of the Kiev regime will not give them any protection whatsoever. And we have a new phenomenon. the activities of Western media, namely NATO countries' journalists, with regard to what is currently happening, Western media representatives who are interested, they're not journalists, they are participants to all these smear campaigns in violation of Russian law in the company of Ukrainian terrorists. They are present in the Russian territory. Russian competent authorities introduce criminal charges against them. Namely, we're talking about journalists of Italian TV radio company VAR, and the criminal charge was pressed. In their reports, they made an information shield for terrorist activities of the Kiev regime. They talked with the Ukrainian army officer. They filmed him. He was wearing SS insignia. These were direct SS insignia. Moreover, in these reports, Western journalists told us about alleged care for civilians by the armed forces of Ukraine in the Russian regions. At the same time, for some reason, these Western journalists have not mentioned many cases when terrorists destroyed residential houses using anti-tank mines, shelled from drones. They haven't reported about attacks against civil cars with families and children that tried to flee the area. And the genuine goal behind invaders' presence, namely terrorism, clearly was not mentioned by those uninvited guests that rushed to our territory without the relevant accreditation, visas, and so on. Incidentally, that is not the only trip of such pseudo-journalists. As we have already mentioned, law enforcers of Russia brought criminal charges over the trespassing, and they claim that they will do it once again. Let me warn foreign journalists that a legal visit to Russia is only possible once you get the relevant visa, if we're talking about a foreigner, and the accreditation of the Russian Foreign Ministry. Now let's get down to the crimes by the Kiev regime. International institutions and media ignore the atrocities of Ukrainian Nazis. They unleashed a deliberate hunt for Russian civilians, including women and children. They torture them, and that is neglected by everyone. We will do our utmost to make it public. On the 15th of August, in the Belgorod region, the 2 employees of the ambulance crew were targeted by the drone attack. On the 16th of August, there was an attack of the Ukrainian armed forces at the Galactica Mall, full of visitors with children. A fire broke out due to deliberate strikes. 11 persons were affected. Terrorists did not allow firemen and first responders to work. They continued deliberate shelling. As a result of the consolidated work of our services, casualties were averted, and the very next day, kamikaze drone strike killed a civilian. On the 17th of August, large-scale artillery attacks wounded 10 persons, including 2 children, killing a pregnant woman due to a targeted strike at the bus stop of a civilian bus. Attack over the bridge through the same river on the 16th of August killed 2 young Russian volunteers. They selflessly helped that day the local population to evacuate. On the 18th of August, drone attack seriously wounded 2 women in Shebekino due to the drone attack. On the 19th of August, drone strikes injured 1 civilian in the settlement of Borisovka, and 2 persons were injured in the settlement of Malo-Mikhailovka. Terrorists deliberately tried to kill civilians in Russia, and that is showcased by their recent attack in Suja using drone. A car was used by a man and a woman. They tried to evacuate with their two nephews, and as a result, children were wounded with a charge filled with metal pellets. A boy had a severe skull injury. He went through an 8-hour surgery where all the NGOs, interstate entities in charge of human rights and protection of children's rights, protection of health. The girl got a knee injury. A fluffy toy saved her from a possible death and even more severe injury. Where's the international community? Where all those international Western magazines and newspapers who put pictures of suffering children on their front cover, and at the same time they turn a blind eye to the suffering of Russian children, of children of other nationalities. What kind of a segregation is here? What kind of a division, inhumane division into classes, categories, and subgroups? The man got multiple shrapnel wounds. Indeed, that is the neo-Nazism of the Kiev regime, pure and simple. At the same time, neo-Nazis have been perpetrating atrocities against Ukrainian citizens. Russian military recorded a cynical killing of 2 exhausted civilians of Volchansk. One of them was wounded already. As people tried to evacuate from the destroyed building, Ukrainian fighters, instead of saving them, cynically fired mines using drone. Monsters from the Ukrainian armed forces put on Nazi paraphernalia, and they made racist insults against elderly men who got lost and who needed help in the Kursk region. It was styled to the SS soldiers' speech. Apparently, it was not enough for them, and they had to scale up the effect. On the one hand, it is atrocious. We want it to never to happen again. On the other hand, there in Paris, in London, in Rome, in Brussels, in Washington, New York, Ottawa, Canberra, people still don't believe that we are talking about outright murderers and terrorists, those who lost their humanity, who deep down profess everything that was previously called fascism, Nazism, racism, xenophobia. And this footage that are posted online become proof that bring people worldwide to senses. That is the proof of animal hatred to people of different nationality that speak their native language. This footage allows us to identify the persons and the whereabouts of those thugs that commit these atrocities. A proof of many barbaric crimes of Ukrainian fighters against civilians in the Kursk region, namely killings, destruction of residential houses, taking hostages of Russian citizens, killings, tortures, looting, just like terrorist attacks in other regions. Strikes against the NPP. It is carefully recorded. It is considered by Russian investigative bodies, and those terrorists who will not be justly avenged during hostilities will be persecuted without expiry date until they are definitely punished. Luckily, not all Ukrainian military fulfill Zelensky orders without complaint. recently it became known that another group of Ukrainian POWs decided to fight as part of the voluntary Bogdan Khmelnytsky battalion that is made up of former Ukrainian servicemen. And this desire not to have anything to do with the Kiev criminals and to be on the right side of history, and we can only welcome that. Indeed, that is a tragedy of Ukrainian people. However, that is also a chance to rehabilitate before the previous generations of fathers and grandfathers that protected this land from Nazis and fascists. And that is also a chance and an opportunity to rehabilitate for the future generations.
We have also drawn attention to the recent visit of American Senators Richard Blumenthal and Lindsey Graham to Ukraine. After meeting with Kiev neo-Nazis with their leader, they reported that the letter was decisive to reach a strategic agreement with the U.S. regarding the rare earth materials that pertain to Ukraine for the total sum of $1 trillion. But they didn't say something that I would like to say. Namely, that in return to those promises given by American senators, Zelensky received a proposition that he was interested in, but these propositions would be implemented at the expense of Ukrainian citizens that would not return home. That's yet another story of American political elite corruption in the Kiev regime. It is yet another demonstration of the true of the true essence of the Kiev regime. Ukraine doesn't have anything left of its natural resources. At the same time, and it's quite curious, the Ukrainian Rada is now considering a law bill from freeing corrupt politicians from responsibility, from liability. It's a very powerful fact statement, and they continue to revise the history, the Kiev regime. On the 13th of August, in Ivano-Frankivsk, after Poltava, a memorial plaque was opened, dedicated to you won't believe whom. This time, it's not an American figure. It's not something that is not close to Ukraine. It's Johar Dudayev, the person whose hands were covered with blood, who fought on the territory in Chechnya and committed crimes against women and children. Now we have a memorial plaque dedicated to Johar Dudayev. What do we have to expect next? Some kind of a park in a Ukrainian city dedicated to ISIS, which is prohibited, or maybe a cafe dedicated to Al-Qaeda, which is also prohibited. What is going to come next? Maybe a dead end dedicated to Bin Laden. What's the next step that they're going to take? What's the next bottom that they're going to break? Zelensky's team is now seeking new bloody heroes to include them into the quote-unquote pantheon of bloody Nazis. But the bottom line is hatred to Russians, to Russia, to our history, to our culture, to our victories. Ukraine Banderites are ready to commemorate thugs, terrorists, thus confirming their own terrorist essence. In the last 7 days, about 10 monuments were demolished in Ukraine dedicated to Soviet liberators. Let me remind you, they, together with Soviet soldiers, were fighting against Nazism and fascism. Their fathers, grandfathers were fighting against Nazism, and those monuments were erected by Ukrainian Nazism, people who had Ukrainian citizenship. Neo-Nazis also desecrated other memorials in Kharkiv, for example, dedicated to Malinovsky, Konev. As for Belgorod-Dnestrovsk in the Odessa region, the monument to Alexander Pushkin has now been desecrated. As for the Kursk region, those criminals would be prosecuted. On the 13th of August, Ukrposhta hastily presented a design of a post stamp dedicated to terrorist acts of the Ukrainian armed forces in the Kursk region. It presents the moment of when the Russian captives are knelt, quote unquote, before Ukraine. I would like to emphasize that the actions to humiliate our soldiers are violating the Geneva Convention on the treatment of prisoners of war of August 12, 1949. Article 13 enshrines that there is guarantee for them to protect them from violence, intimidation, insults. Article 14 says that they have the right to respect for their person and honor. It's not a protection, self-defeat, as the Zelensky says. It's the loss of all values. Another evidence came yesterday. It was another evidence. The Nazi regime of the president, who's not supposed to be the president, uses the help of radicals and schismatics. Is trying to destroy the canonical Ukrainian Orthodox Church. They try to capture their religious objects. Metropolitan Arseny is now being held captive for a couple of months now. I think they're fighting for God, obviously. I don't know. Now the junta being encouraged of corresponding agencies. Where's UNESCO, I should ask? We see all kinds of dirty tricks to promote the bill which will prohibit the Ukrainian Orthodox Church. Let me remind you, it's a canonical church, which is the true church that Ukraine has. It was authorized by Zelensky, who, I don't know what he believes in. And apologies, I think he also believes in the power of a white powder. It's a satanic action which is aimed at the elimination of the orthodoxy and at deepening the schism, and other representatives of other faiths that are also taking part in this. They're also puppets of this regime. This is a horrendous step, and it violates a range of international documents, international instruments. It violates the laws of the Ukraine itself. All the rights of the Ukrainian Orthodox Church and of millions of parishioners should be restored, and the criminals should be violated. Yesterday, the Ministry of Foreign Affairs of the Russian Federation published a detailed comment in this regard. This only reiterates the character of Russia's special military operation to demilitarize and denazify Ukraine. We have repeatedly said that all these tasks will be reached. Another topic that Kiev likes to discuss in its international communication is a topic of children. Do you remember when the Kiev regime used far-fetched stories, blamed our countries for stealing children? Let's now take a look at real facts. There was a real case that demonstrates a blatant cynicism of the Kiev regime and a full ignorance to the fates and lives of their own children, of their own citizens. Now I'm talking about minors, underage children. The Kiev authorities decided to repatriate to Ukraine 115 minors from children's home in Verdansk. In March and April, they were turned over to the Italian city of Bergamo in Lombardia. The Ukrainian children were given temporary parents, and it was organized. The education process was organized. I'm not here not talking about Italians who were helping them with clothes. They were helping them to find peace. The Ukrainian consulate in Milan reached a decision to return kids to Ukraine. Maybe here they're talking about reuniting families, you might say. Maybe they will be given some additional conditions that will educate them, will treat them, raise them well. Don't get your hopes up. We have a Nazi regime in Ukraine. We're talking about children who do not have parents. They were supposed to be given rooms that don't even have basic amenities. It's very hard to talk about this. I hope you realize that. It's not some inhumane behavior. Those are very horrendous actions. So they're being returned from Lombardia to Ukraine, and this is being done by the representatives of the Kiev regime. They're going to put them into temporary shelters, not designed for children of this age, and then they are supposed to be transported to the US. This is a horrendous crime of the Kiev regime, which allegedly cares for the rights of children, and even blatant propaganda activists from Italian organizations cannot contemplate this situation without fear. They have actually been supporting the Kiev regime over the last couple of years. They don't yet realize how inhumane those actions are of the Kiev regime. Italians, maybe representatives of other countries, will see on their own example, on the example of their own life, that's the case, but they don't understand what we have been talking about for years now. International Criminal Court, let's talk about this. This body, as I remember, was referring to some documents that don't have any legal basis, any legal foundations, warrants, I don't remember what they call them. They were coupling those documents with the actions of Russia in Ukraine. But do you realize what's happening there? On the 14th of August, local judicial authorities decided to leave the kids there before they can get an asylum. 3 17 years old. The case of the 3 17 years old couldn't be dealt with. They try to reduce they keep to reduce the age for drafting. We started talking about it at the beginning of 2022. That's not the first case. Corresponding agencies are now investigating a Ukrainian citizen who was authorized by Ukrainian consulate in Neapol, is now being blamed for refusing to to transport children. She was demanding money from families, and now she's also charged with threat to life and health. That's what the Kiev regime is about. It's not an exception. It's only confirming its essence. That's what we see in real practice, in real life. It's noteworthy that the official Italian authorities have not reacted in any way to these horrendous facts. Why so? The topic of Ukraine has become, to the Italian authorities, the main one. The international organizations in the world, they're promoting Ukrainian interests. Why not comment what's happening to the Ukrainian children? I remember what Italian officials said regarding the warrant of the International Criminal Court. They were given their comments about what's happening. Well, here you have the Ukrainian children. Why don't Ukrainian authorities comment this situation? We do not hear any comments regarding the situation of the telecorporation RAIA. An Italian journalist conducts an interview, and this journalist talks about the proponent of the Nazi ideology, and no, they haven't reacted in any way. Maybe Italians forgot about atrocities that Italians were victims of on the part of fascists and Nazis. I understand why the official Rome doesn't comment it. They don't have any authorization to do so. The Western handlers of Rome do not allow it. Well, they have to overcome this veto. And everything that is anti-Russian is the narrative of NATO, Washington, London. Well, let's change the situation. The support for the neo-Nazi clique in Kiev, we can see this support and these actions, the support for Italian neo-Nazis is way easier for them as protection of Ukrainian children. We have to open our eyes and see what's happening. Neo-Nazism supported by Western countries, as an example, as for Moldavia, we have celebrated the 80th anniversary when the Moldova was celebrated. Then the Soviet troops liberated the territory of the Moldovan SSR and took to the central part of Romania, and then Bucharest couldn't continue on the side of the Nazis. This operation was included into the textbooks on military art. In August 1944, the Black Sea troops broke the defense of the enemy and closed the encirclement of the German and Romanian army of Ukraine. The Soviet troops defeated 1 million troops.
This allowed the Soviet troops of liberated to fully rid the territory of the enemies, and in those days the Soviet troops showed not only their excellence in leading the battle but also high morale, ready to self-sacrifice. And Lieutenant Alexei Shemigon and Sergeant Alexander Shevchenko repeated the heroic act of Alexander Matrosov. And Alexander Gusev and Kuzma Gorenka died throwing with grenade under the German tanks. All 4 of them were honored with the title of the Soviet hero post-mortem. And in May-August 1944, current Moldovan partisan troops destroyed over 11,000 soldiers and officers of the enemy, 25 enemy tanks, armored vehicles, and derailed 13 military troop trains. Unfortunately, the current Moldovan regime is trying to eradicate those heroic pages of the history, trying to make it so this never happened. And Maria Sandu, who regularly scares people with the so-called Soviet horrors, consistently leads the campaign of blanching the Nazis' supporters. And in the Republic, with the military honors, they're opening monuments for the Romanian heroes. And there are currently the Georgian sign and movies of Great Patriotic War are prohibited. And the actions serve as nothing but offense for the liberators, for the memory of their grandparents, great-grandparents. They're not ready to tolerate the ideological ideas that are being imposed, which is showcased by the actions of the voluntary patriotic movements who are trying to rebuild the Soviet memorials, carry out searches. They're trying to organize the memorial actions. And they're carrying out anti-fascist actions, just as their predecessors did, who tried to liberate the Soviet Union. And today, in the 21st century, Moldovans serve as the same anti-fascists. Today, in the so-called peaceful time, and ahead of celebration of the liberation of Moldova, local volunteers organized the events of redesigning the cemetery in the memorial complex of the Serpent Memorial, as well as other memorials all over Moldova. And there will be the Liberation March, which will happen on August 21st along the streets of Chisinau, and will end at the War Memorial of Vechnist. To the memorial campaigns will be joined by the Moldovan diaspora in Russia. On August 17th, 18th, along the streets of Moscow, St. Petersburg, of Moscow and Leningrad region, there has been a festive motor rally, and its participants held the ceremony of wreath-laying along the postments of liberation of Moldova, and the memory of the Great Patriotic War is alive in the hearts of Moldovans. And we try to support them any way we can, because, of course, for a lot of years, people believed that this memory cannot be not only killed or eradicated, it cannot be silenced, but now we understand that the good have to fight as well. Any efforts of the neo-Nazis' revenge are doomed to fail, judging by the decisive nature of the Moldovans. Look at what is happening all over the world. On August 15th, in Japan, there have been events on the so-called Day of the End of War, which once again obviously was the demonstration of the revanchist moods of the official Tokyo. Once again, among pompous words of Japanese political government, there wasn't even a shred of true remorse for the aggression they unleashed. And they have something to show remorse for before the civilians, nor have they been apologies for suffering a substantial material damage caused to the Asian state's civil population. Instead of that, we only heard praises for compatriots dead who died in battle. And in connection with this rather questionable date, since, as we all know, the Second World War ended with the signature of Japanese Act of Surrender on September 2nd, 1945, there have been another mass pilgrimage of Japanese politicians, including 3 acting members of the Cabinet of Ministers, over 70 deputies of the parliament, to the Shinto shrine Yasukuni, odious symbol of militarism, where, among others, they honored Class A war criminals sentenced to death by the judgment of International Military Tribunal for the Far East. So what did the Prime Minister Fumio Kishida do? Once again, he made an oblational donation for the aforementioned temple. This is so like what is currently taking place in the Ministry of Defense in Germany, where they applied new guidelines on how to honor the traditions of German militaries, and the German military fighters received autobiographies of those who they should follow as example of the German soldiers and German fighters. The world is watching in shock and horror when our ministry posted photos and short notices on the life stories of those who current German soldiers should follow as example according to their superiors. Those are SS officers, representatives of the Third Reich, who not only executed orders, they acted on those orders themselves. The so-called heroes of Germany, who received their awards on the battlefields of the East Front, they were killing our soldiers. So going back to Japan, we strongly condemn these practices. Once again, we point out that by doing so, Tokyo is offending the feelings of neighboring countries who fell victim to this barbaric expansionist campaign, and once again demonstrates the current course of Japanese administration on speeding up remilitarization. We'd like once again to state that Japan, by expanding its military potential, goes against legal limitation in this area. We're continuing to closely follow the steps of Tokyo to expand naval activity near the borders in the Far East, to include extra-regional parties among the NATO member countries, as well as promoting the initiatives of Washington to create in Asia-Pacific region the narrow bloc associations aimed at ensuring double deterrence of Russia and China. Undoubtedly, such foreign policy course from Japan presents obvious threats for regional stability and security. Especially alarming are their plans to dilute the nuclear weapon-free status of Japan towards joining the so-called joint nuclear missions of the USA, conducting multilateral exercises by using the Allied Strategic Air Force certified to execute nuclear tasks, or discussing the possibilities of storing American medium-range missiles at their territories. And Japan's refusal to join the declared by the previous generations of politicians peaceful development once again will pose new challenges to the security, will escalate the pressure in the Asia-Pacific region, and will stimulate the new stage of arms race. We once again call on Tokyo to learn lessons from the horrible pages of history, accept the results of the Second World War, and refuse the revanchism and new militarization, which already brought a lot of suffering to the peoples. The Nord Stream is once again in our attention, and the UN Security Council in the last 24 hours touched upon this subject. And there have been different comments of the official representative of the Minister of Foreign Affairs of Germany, Sebastian Fischer. He made this statement during the weekly press conference of the German government on August 19th, where he stated that Berlin apparently exchanges with Russia some information on the terrorist attacks committed in September 2022 on the gas streamlines Nord Stream 1, Nord Stream 2. As you understand, this is not happening, especially considering as a couple weeks ago, his boss, Chancellor Scholz, said that it's Russia who stopped supplying gas to Germany, which in truth, actually the opposite is taking place. Russia is prepared to do it, and we've mentioned it repeatedly, even in the interviews with German mass media. Russia has never stood in the way of supplying their energy resources, of supplying our gas to Germany. And should such decisions be made, it could happen within a month. So any absurdity is very predictable when we hear it from the official German representatives, but we will continue to comment on that. But by making such a statement, the German side probably tried to question the legitimacy of complaints that we presented to the German authorities as for their refusal to cooperate with investigating this crime of an international scale, because it not only took place on the European continent, but on the territory of several countries of the European continent. And it happened in the violation of the subsequent anti-terrorist UN conventions. And Germany, by refusing to cooperate, also serves in violation of these conventions. It's also worth noting that the words of Mr. Fischer are of no truth at all. So let us state this as simple as possible so the Germans can translate it properly. It's a lie. For over 2 years, all the requests of our competent authorities as for the attacks on the Nord Streams, we only receive empty excuses from the German side. Not a single so-called document that was sent our way contained any factological information. Not for the first time, Berlin is trying to convince everyone in international diplomatic society that supposedly they're complying with all the obligations of the international law. Not only that, they're trying to feed to the international community this so-called bureaucratic pile instead of complying with their obligation. It's nothing but lies. They supply no facts that they have on the investigation, and they never supplied any facts to our side. And Russia insists on holding official bilateral consultations in line with current guidelines that are already enshrined in anti-terrorist UN conventions. And we would like Mr. Fischer, or perhaps his bosses, Ministry of Foreign Affairs, or perhaps the Chancellor of Germany, to speak if they're actually committed with fulfilling obligations of the UN anti-terrorist conventions. The statement of the representatives of the Ministry of Foreign Affairs of Germany only reaffirms our suspicions that Berlin is trying to hide the actual investigation, trying to do anything so that we don't understand who exactly planned the attack on the largest trans-European object of energetic infrastructure, which is especially important for Germany itself. And as for the repercussions of the German mass medias for trying to establish the truth in the energetic security, I think is another testament that once again Berlin has something to hide, and they have no interest of conducting a true investigation and unleashing the real information, the truth. There have been a lot of questions I'd like to comment additionally. On August 19th, there has been information on including of the stop list representatives of 9 British analytic structures through publicly available mass media and on the internet. These organizations spread in the international informational space misinformation, discrediting the Russian state, and over the years they're trying to no avail, but they're still trying to create conditions to destabilize internal political situation in our country, and not only in Russia but in our friendly countries. They subsequently participate in information campaign to support the Nazi regime in Kiev. We continue to oversee these dangerous work of British authorities against our countries, and including in the Russian counter-sanction list the heads of the most aggressive British propaganda structures, and the work on expanding the Russian stop list will continue. And of course, over this time, over the last 10 days were addressed to us around the situation of the Olympics in Paris. And for several reasons, the refusal to let participate certain athletes, the segregation of athletes, horrific performances that took place during the opening ceremony and the closing ceremony, the discrimination as a whole of athletes. We've commented at length. And of course, discrimination against journalists who report on the events of the Olympics, and we've commented on this regularly, but summarizing all the questions that we've received, I would like to comment on this a little more. Millions of people around the world were shocked by the scandalous episodes of the closing ceremony of the Olympics, and I believe this is how it will go down in history, as a scandal. And the main question that both political representatives, the leaders of countries, high guests, was the following: why the sports, and this is the event commemorating the sports, this is the sport event, why the sport had to take a step back in order to welcome the ideology. And nobody even questions what kind of ideology is this. It's the liberational ideology. But the sporting event was filled with this ideological side. And there are a lot of proof and evidence to that, starting with athletes not being allowed to participate based on their nationality, to offending religious beliefs, to segregating journalists, politicized and ideological component of the history of the made-up gender issue, and the games themselves took place with a lot of violations. Everyone could see for themselves how unfit the water was in the Seine. During the opening day, there have been disruptions in the transportation systems. Athletes reported on the Spartan conditions of living in the Olympic Village. As for the Russian participation, a lot of experts agree that without the Russian Olympic team, a lot of types of sport lost in spectator aspect and the level of participation. And it's not only the world community who lost, spectators who lost, athletes who lost. The ideological aspect, the segregation which reaped through every decision of the International Olympic Committee. And it's obvious not only to our country, but to everyone. And the president of the International Olympic Committee, Mr. Bach, closely followed his Western curators. His actions divided the international sport. They're undermining the sport as a whole. Imagine someone who watched the Olympics for the first time. Now they have a disrupted vision of what a true Olympic movement stands for. And the International Olympic Committee took away Russian and Belarusian athletes' dreams to participate in the Olympic Games, to represent their countries. And back together with the Kiev regime, conducted close following of Russians on social media, presented psychological pressure on athletes. There was blatant discrimination.
There were cases when IOC representatives proposed to Russian sporting federations to replace athletes that got Olympic licenses for somebody that was not selected without any clarification. Besides that, the advocate of the new normality and new inclusivity, namely Thomas Bach, made atrocious comments on gender issues that are anti-scientific, anti-social. He also made dubious decisions on accessing of women boxers that have failed gender tests. He made blatant lies towards International Boxing Association. It's up to experts to deal with that. just like they should do with considering why athletes were allowed to participate that have failed gender tests. Actually, this decision presented a risk to the health of female boxers, and that is an outrageous case. We can state that further deviation from ideals of the Olympics and the principles would lead to further degradation of international sports. That is something that our country said. Russia will continue to take efforts to develop sports and international sporting cooperation, bring about conditions for participation of Russian sportsmen in international competitions, will further demand that the IOC leadership abandons its destructive anti-Russian course and strictly follow the universal principles of the international Olympic movement. And surprisingly, the Olympics that had quite an impression on everyone. Tensions are running high regarding the U.S. anti-doping agency. It faces serious claims by the World Anti-Doping Agency. Reportedly, USADA systemically violated the World Anti-Doping Code. How come? They used the scheme where athletes that were caught using doping continued to participate in competitions, but for that they provided information on other violators. We know at least about 3 cases of this kind. I don't know what is worse, to legalize participation of athletes that use doping, or that they were made as someone who called the shots. I really don't know what is the best option. Besides that, according to WADA, 90% of American athletes, in principle, are not covered by anti-doping code. A third of those who are covered have not had doping tests. In 2023, USADA ran less doping tests than the national anti-doping organizations of Russia, China, Germany, France, Italy, and the UK. Hence, by doing so, USADA creates threats for the integrity of sporting competitions. And against this backdrop, we cannot talk about the fact that the American sport is clean, is doping-free, and we can also talk about the victory of American athletes in global championships. If that is true, for our part, we believe that all countries should enjoy equal rights and obligations in the development of sports and participate in competitions without any discrimination or double standards. We do understand, however, that the Western liberal idea prioritizes the other facts. For instance, the Czech authorities decided not to recognize Russian passports without biometric chip, and that is a discriminatory measure. Once again, they showed their purely Russophobic approaches, in this case primarily with regard to common Russian citizens. According to clarification of the Czech Foreign Ministry, there's a transition period that the Czech authorities provide to Russian citizens in the Czech Republic so that they could have their Russian biometric passports done. And initially, it is restricted to September 15th. It was extended to December 31st. Lately, the Czech Republic has done its utmost to make the work of the Russian missions even more difficult. They demanded that we close our 2 consulate generals. They demanded that we reduce the number of our diplomatic staff in the embassies and consulate generals, and it affected consular services. Our consular employees do their utmost so that Russian citizens, as well as nationals of other countries that request consular assistance, legalization of documents, and prompt assistance in their daily lives so that they would not be affected. But the reduction of the employees in the consulates was bound to affect the way the consulate works in terms of timing, in terms of the quality of work. There was a question on the situation in Venezuela. We continue to keep a close look over the situation in Venezuela after presidential election in this country on July 28th. The situation objectively remains stable. The post-electoral process is developing within the legal framework. Bolivarian authorities ensure protection of the constitutional order and public order. Against this backdrop, we see that there's been mounting coordinated external pressure against Caracas using a broad set of toolbox in order to delegitimize the outcome of voting. It's not the first time that we see that. As Madam Rodriguez put it eloquently, I do not know whether she was foreign minister back in the day or head of the government of Venezuela. She said that the West is not happy. It's not that the West is not happy with the election in Venezuela. It is not happy with the outcome of the election. You can have as many elections as possible there, but until the West gets the result it wants, it will not rest. That is a typical response of losers when we're talking about not recognizing the outcome of vote and encouraging aggressive rallies and clashes with law enforcers. That is a totally different scenario that has been seen time and again. That is the scenario of the color revolution. The practice is not new. We had these examples in the post-Soviet space, namely in Ukraine, as early as in 2004, as well as in many other countries. Venezuela itself, not so long ago, faced similar challenges. You might recall the project of the parallel government and the legalization of this so-called pseudo-president Guaido. We all know how it all ended up. The so-called Santo Domingo Declaration adopted upon the U.S. initiative and the resolution of the Organization of American States calls for an intra-Venezuelan divide is the connivance to destabilization, creating a controlled chaos in Venezuela, and that is a well-known tactics which will trigger new waves of immigration. Those who fuel pressure on Caracas should understand the repercussions. There's a dangerous precedent when external forces try to dictate their will to sovereign state, to their legitimate authorities and to electoral bodies. Any other country may find itself in the place of Venezuela. In this regard, it is necessary to note that in 2001, the Inter-American Democratic Charter was signed, and there is no provision that would allow to have some kind of independent verification of the results of election in a certain country. We are convinced that the key of peaceful and sustainable development of Venezuela is the will of its people, and it made an unequivocal choice. We welcome the commitment of Venezuelan authorities to defend the sovereignty of their country, to ensure constitutional order, to continue the dialogue with interested political forces in order to find ways to settle disputes within the legal framework, and it is essential for these efforts to be supported by everyone who is interested in a stable and independent Latin American region. Russia is one of the first who supports such an approach, and we express solidarity with Fraternal Venezuela and its government. All those who try to say that some other candidate won and not Maduro, I would like to ask them, namely the United States and other countries, I have a question to them. For all these years, you have believed that some kind of Guaido was the president of Venezuela. How come that in your countries, primarily in the United States, how come that you made a legal decision that Guaido is no longer the president. Where did you write it? Where did you say it? You recognized him as president back in the day. Why do you abandon him now? In this case, you need to make a legal, formal decision to write some kind of a document that, from the point of view of the current White House thinking, Guaido is no longer president. It would be funny, hadn't it been so sad and dangerous. The humanitarian situation in the Gaza Strip. Of special concern is the disastrous humanitarian situation in the Gaza Strip that was a result of the military campaign by Israel and the total blockade that virtually separated Gaza from the external world. The civil infrastructure of the Gaza Strip is on the verge of collapse. The areas where IDPs hide and they have schools and hospitals full, water supply systems is out of service. According to UN agencies that participate in various programs helping Palestine, there is mounting food shortage. Stocks are at critical level. According to our information, Gaza has only one warehouse of the UNWFP. At the same time, the relatively safe regions are shrinking due to intensive Israeli shellings, and the large-scale evacuation impedes humanitarian convoys. Trucks with humanitarian assistance provided by Jordan, by Egypt, through the Israeli port of Ashdod, could enter the Gaza Strip only through 3 cross points. In July this year, the World Food Programme managed to deliver 11.5 thousand tons of food. Clearly, that is next to nothing to over 2 million strong population of Gaza. There's lack of medical assistance, of hygiene supplies, and the situation has degraded. The enclave declared the polio epidemic. The number of people with hepatitis A has reached 40,000 people. We make our tangible contribution to ease the suffering of civilians. Since October 19, 2023, Russian AMICOM planes delivered, with the help of Egypt and the Egyptian Society of Red Crescent, delivered over 700,000 tons of cargo. The unfolding humanitarian disaster struck a chord among many of our compatriots, our civil society. That is why I would like to specifically highlight that, along with state bodies, the humanitarian assistance is collected by many Russian NGOs, including individuals. They collected thousands of tons of food, medication, essential goods, and this is a work in progress. Let me once again draw your attention to the fact that this is a disaster that was triggered by over 10 months of hostilities. We highlight the need to immediately implement the UNSC and UN General Assembly resolutions demanding to cease fire to ensure unimpeded humanitarian access to the Gaza Strip. This would bring about conditions for the long-term normalization in the Israeli-Palestinian conflict and turn the efforts, settlement efforts within the political and diplomatic framework. And a few words on other humanitarian campaigns. On the 10th of August, with the participation of Russian Ambassador Terarov and Healthcare Minister of the Republic of Angola, Luanda hosted a ceremony providing to the Angolan side free of charge 50 ambulance cars. These cars were supplied as part of our efforts to meet the request of the Angolan leadership. This was praised by the Angolan partnership at the level of leadership. It was widely praised. The free of charge provision of these cars to Angola is within the spirit of friendship, cooperation, and mutual support, which is characteristic for the ties between our peoples. And another humanitarian campaign on the 20th of August 2024, the special flight of Russian Emicorn delivered another batch of Russian humanitarian cargo to the city of Kandahar in southern Afghanistan. We're talking about 25,000 tons of wheat flour. This is within the framework of a special program of Россотрудничества, and the work on the humanitarian track will be followed up on. And an important, interesting event took place in Chelyabinsk. It opened the Center for Public Diplomacy of the SCO. We plan to organize business, cultural, and sporting events, and we will definitely share more detailed material in addition to the briefing. Another important public project, NGO Without Border, it is being carried out together with the Gorchikov Fund, the Institute of Social Creative Development, the Association of Volunteer Centers, the Agency of Social Information with the support of the Presidential Grant Fund. It's been up and running since 2023. It is aimed at leaders, managers, and activists of Russian and foreign NGOs that carry out international social activities. The goal of the program is to shape the NGO community that is interested in implementing projects in international cooperation, the portfolio of initiatives that have high chances to receive grants. At the first stage of the program in 2023, some 600 NGO representatives participated from 35 countries from various walks of life. We're talking about leaders of sporting and creative projects, social organizations, volunteer groups. 32 participants made it to the finals. They were invited to Moscow for in-person events. This year, as we develop the project, we plan to have targeted work with participants through mentorship, support of NGO representatives, and starting with the second stage of the project, we will work with the finalists. The program will allow us to test and to scale up the systemic approach to the targeted audience and to coordinate the activities of NGOs to fit it into the work on the external humanitarian front. We will provide the link to the program in the text of the current briefing. And another very important humanitarian and cultural dimension of our diplomatic efforts. Today there will be the inauguration of the photo exhibition, Architecture of Diplomacy, dedicated to 103rd anniversary of the main administration for service and diplomatic corps. The exhibition will showcase 32 photos talking about the history of the administration, as well as 22nd Moscow-listed buildings. For each of them, the historian, guide, and expert in Moscow, Vitaly Kalashnikov, recorded an audio guide. On the 24th of August, 1921, a document was signed on the establishment of the Central Bureau to service foreigners in Moscow. It was tasked to ensure all the necessary things to the diplomatic corps working in the capital. And this bureau had 38 mansions. The majority of them, up until now, have foreign embassies. Today, there are over 100 monuments, sites of architecture, namely masterpieces of renowned architects Shechtel, Kakushev, Valkot, as well as examples of neo-Baroque, neoclassicism, neo-Gothics, and the administration holds these invaluable cultural sites in due state, and it tries to familiarize everyone interested with the history and features of them. Today, the ceremony will be attended by Chief Architect Mr. Ochnev, and the exhibition will last till September the 8th. We invite everyone to attend this exhibition.
One more event that is being organized by the administration of the Foreign Ministry. We are celebrating the 25th anniversary of the summer games in the Zavitov recreation complex. It will be attended by the accredited heads of diplomatic missions, the members of their families. There are 8 kinds of sports that are being awarded. It will be judged by representatives of the Russian sport movement, champions of the Olympics and other world championships. Mr. Fadin will open the games. The 3-time fencing champion, Mrs. Gorokova, the representative of Gosduma of the Federal Assembly, the Olympic champion, Mrs. Zhureva. It will be also accompanied by music and gastronomical festival, My Family. And gastronomical map of Russia, it will familiarize the guests with the Russian traditional dishes. We invite the media to attend this event. Tomorrow, on the 22nd of August, we are celebrating the day of the Russian state flag. On August 20th, 1994, a 1714 Act was adopted. The historic Russian tricolor flag was adopted. The goal was to educate the future generations to pay respect to state symbols. The end of quote. It was firstly mentioned back in 1668 when it was first hoisted on the first Russian ship overall during the reign of Alexei Mikhailovich. And in 1693 it became the main official flag of the Peter the Great. Alexander the Great in April 1883 ordered that in those solemn occasions when it is recognized possible to allow the decoration of buildings with flags shall be used exclusively the Russian flag, consisting of 3 colors, upper white, middle blue, and lower red. In 1896, a special meeting was held at the Ministry of Justice. It was convened by Emperor Nicholas II. It was decided that the flag should be white, blue, red, and no other colors should be used. Currently, the main document describing the flag and regulating the rules of its use is the Federal Constitutional Law of the Russian Federation from December 25th, 2000, on the state flag of the Russian Federation. The Article 1 states that the Russian flag is a rectangular cloth with 3 equal horizontal stripes. The upper one shall be white, the middle one shall be blue, and the lower one shall be red. The ratio of the flag's width to its length is defined as 2:3. There is no official interpretation of the colors of the flag, but the most common is the following. White symbolizes purity and independence and peace. Blue symbolizes faith, loyalty, and justice, and it also reminds of the medal of the Virgin Mary, which is considered the symbol of Russia. Red is a symbol of courage, strength, and bravery. It serves as a reminder of our compatriots who gave their lives to protect our fatherland. Once again, let me reiterate, there is no official interpretation, well, at least I'm not familiar with it, but there is a symbolic description of it. There is one important event from the 23rd August to the 1st August. A Spassky Tower festival will be held. It became one of the main events. It's a very bright event which will consist from the best Russian and foreign musical bands. It will be held on the Red Square. It is a very beautiful event. It will foster the strengthening of international ties. It will popularize music and present different Russian and foreign bands. Belarus, Venezuela, Guinea, Egypt, China, Thailand, Turkey, and South Africa will will attend this festival. 57 countries have attended this festival in the last 15 years, and 860,000 people have attended it over the last 15 years, and it was watched by more than 50 million people. The slogan of this year's festival is dedication to the protectors of the fatherland. On the 24th of August, the 9th All-Russian festival will be held. It's a cinema night. This event is supported by the Ministry of Culture of Russia and the Cinema Fund. The operator of the action is Roskino, the successor of Sovexport Film, All Union Association, which will celebrate its 100th anniversary this year. The year's events will be held abroad for the first time on the basis of Russian foreign institutions. Russian embassies and representative offices of Rostrunchivst and CIS will take part in the Night of Cinema. Armenia, Azerbaijan, Belarus, Kazakhstan, Kyrgyzstan, Moldova, Tajikistan, Turkmenistan, Uzbekistan, and also BRICS countries, Brazil, China, Egypt, Ethiopia, India, and Egypt. The program of the Night of Cinema will include screenings of novelists of national cinematography, and it'll allow to elevate this event to the world and present it to the wider world audiences. I hope that this event will be welcomed abroad with a great interest, and I'm ready to answer your questions. Hello. We just received the news that the Finnish ground forces have announced a series of exercises from August 31st to September 6th in various parts of this Scandinavian country, also very close to the border with Russia. How can you comment on these maneuvers? In peaceful and calm times, that was regarded by everyone as an international rule-based system, a legal system, and there was no contradiction to the law. And within that framework, Russia used to consider and now considers the sovereign right of each state to carry out on its territory any activities, including the military ones, that are regarded by these countries as necessary to ensure its security. But it's important, let me reiterate it, to act in accordance with the norms established by international agreements. But now we are facing a hybrid war waged by the collective West, and we see that significant increase in military activity in Finland is taking place. We have repeatedly noted that foreign policy of Finnish leadership today is organized in line with the collective West and in inflicting a quote-unquote strategic defeat on Russia. We also heard recent statements by Finnish Prime Minister Petteri Orpo and Foreign Minister Elina Valtonen. They actually justify terrorist attacks of Ukrainian neo-Nazis on the Kursk region. And against this backdrop, we regard these maneuvers close to the border. Can you please comment on the decision of the Czech authorities regarding the rector of the Russian Orthodox suburb of Karlovy Vary, demanding that he leave the Czech Republic, as well as the statements of the foreign minister of the Czech Republic, Lipovsky, against the Russian Orthodox Church? This verbal activity is understandable by the Czech authorities, but we feel like the Czech authorities would be bored if they didn't have to discuss us. As for the representative in Karlovy Vary, we see that they're just fighting against God. It's an anti-God policy. Actually, they're persecuting the representatives of this faith. It's really sad when they don't know their history, their culture, and the Russian Orthodox Church has greatly contributed into the development of the church in this country. Less educated people come to power nowadays. Well, let us help them and remind them of the facts, historical facts of the Czech Republic. The prosecution of the Russian Orthodox Church is initiated by the country, which considers itself the successor to the Great Moravia, where the Saint Cyril and Methodius began the entire Slavic world. Now they're prosecuting the church. Well, we can regard it only in this way, but we see in whole how this liberal dictatorship, and in particular their followers, are committing these acts of aggression against world religions, including Christianity, and it's obvious in all its forms. Thank you very much. Do we have a representative of Izvestia here with us? Hello. You already touched upon this topic. Danish Foreign Minister Lars Løkke said that Ukraine could use Danish weapons to strike Russian territory. How does the Foreign Ministry evaluate these statements? That's nothing new. Not a new statement. Since the launch of the special military operation, the Danish Foreign Ministry is aimed at the maximum damage. The strikes are being launched on different infrastructure objects in the Crimea and Sevastopol, Zaporozhye, Kherson, Lugansk, Donetsk. Now also in the Kursk region. On the 16th of August, the Minister of Defense of Denmark declared that there are no geographical limits as far as the delivery of military equipment goes, and also terrorist attacks were justified, the recent attacks. I think that Copenhagen continues to demonstrate its Russophobic attitudes, and it's ready to support Zelensky's neo-Nazi regime and its support for legalization of terrorist acts. All this only reaffirms the importance of the special military operation, and we have repeatedly said that the goals of this operation will be reached. I have one more question. The British Prime Minister said recently that he is going to increase the military support for Kiev, and he's going to convince to transfer Storm Shadow missiles for use in the center of Russia. I have to understand why the Great Britain does everything to escalate the conflict further and to deteriorate the relations with Russia, and why some countries still remain neutral. London, together with the United States, have become the driver of the policy of deterrence, as they call it, and then the policy of inflicting a strategic, quote-unquote, defeat on Russia. London and Washington have launched different operations within NATO and on other platforms. They had different maneuvers called Russia, and British ships crossed our borders in 2021, even before the special military operation began. There was they were trying to combat our sovereign reserves. They also stole something that they didn't have any right to have. That's the ideology they have, and nobody was opposing such actions. It's a way for them to overcome different crises, both internal and external ones. The change of political elites didn't lead to the revision of approach the British use against Russia. The public statements are anti-Russian, we see it, and they reaffirm the plans of the British establishment to escalate the conflict further. They declare it as their steps and their ideology. They want escalation in bilateral issues. They want to follow this common European policy that is anti-Russian. This is the conceptual, basic, foundational position. The main tool the British Russophobes use to deter our country in the long term is the Kiev regime. This instrumentalized puppet government. All positive assistance along the demonstration of British leadership in countering Russia is, of course, is of course preserved as one of the main themes in the Labour Party politics. And the countering Russia in the context of Ukraine is, for Keir Starmer, of importance. And they can now relaunch the relations with the European Union. We have noted the British approach in the context of the Kursk invasion. The Keir Starmer didn't exclude the possibility of transferring the military equipment. In such statements, as before, there is some kind of uncertainty. We can say there's a highly likely scale. If you remember, there are 10 points, how certain or uncertain some things are. This concerns the ballistic missiles of long range, Storm Shadow. Well, they'll leave London a field for political maneuver. The Kiev regime is now being used as a tool to implement hybrid war, hybrid aggression against our country, as well as a veil, so to speak. The ideologies are Anglo-Saxons. We would remind our British strategists that this escalation only makes it worse for each part of this conflict. But we have to realize that London is the full member of this conflict. Tanks, Challengers too are an evidence to that. It's not good for them that they participated actually in the terrorist acts against our country. It's their global mistake, historical mistake, and it's their crime. How does Moscow evaluate the activity of IAEA in the recent sabotage by the AFU in the ZNPP and threat of attack on the Kursk NPP? We're in close contact with IAEA and we are evaluating any action or inaction. Let me say what we are doing so that we can encourage others. We are in close contact with the IAEA Secretariat, with the director, Rafael Grossi, with the ongoing provocations by the Kiev regime against Russian nuclear facilities, the Zaporozhye nuclear power plant and the Kursk nuclear power plant. In turn, we do everything to enable the agency leadership to get an objective picture of the situation and to evaluate the horrendous crimes of the Zelensky regime that can lead to a large-scale disaster. Rafael Grossi has really said that it's not admissible to attack nuclear facilities, but unfortunately they can not define from which direction the strike came. Russian provocations are of a great threat as far as NPPs go. We hope that the management can ensure the security of these two NPPs. Rafael Grossi reaffirmed his his preparedness to visit the Kursk NPP at the end of August of this year now. We are working on modalities of the upcoming visit. Rafael Grossi wants to lead at the beginning of September another rotation of the IAEA Secretariat on the Zaporozhye NPP.
And Madam Zakharova
выставит на аукцион национализированный культурный центр Дом Москвы в Риге. Деньги от продажи планируют направить Украине. Как бы вы могли это...
House of Moscow in Riga in order to sell it, to supply the money to Ukraine. How could you comment it? You know how there's something that's stolen and there's those who sell what is stolen. And on December 21st, 2023, the representatives of Latvian Special Services entered the House of Cultural Business Center, House of Moscow in Riga. The employers of the house were freed of their means of communication. They were questioned. And then on January 11th, they adopted the project law on expropriating it. And of course, as for legitimacy, for the international law, anything, there is no correlation whatsoever. This was a political order. And I'd like to remind you that this is not an expropriation of their own stuff. It's not the Latvian propriety of public or private property. This is the property of the government of Moscow. We've already verified these actions as raiding, as theft in a state scale, which goes against the norms of international law and the norms that guarantee the untouchability of the property of other countries. And this is another example of what the United States and the United Kingdom have been doing for a while. They steal the property of other countries, they steal private property, and they expropriate something that they have never owned nor has ever been owned by their countries. They attack the private property, houses. Just remember how much property those with diplomatic immunity and those without the status for a lot of years, how much has been stolen and taken away by the American authorities, and now Riga follows in line. We have already qualified this, and all the responsibility for this illegal actions falls on the local authorities. There will be responsive actions. As for the plans of the authorities to send the money gathered from it to the Kiev regime, then this is a step that perfectly correlates with their logic to supporting neo-Nazis and the terrorists represented by the Kiev regime. Kiev and the Latvian authorities and neo-Nazis sitting there have been supporting Kiev for a while. And we shouldn't forget the corrupted nature of Zelensky and his clique. So, once again, the money gathered by selling that which has been stolen from Russia will once again be looted. And after all these events, after stealing, and after stealing the House of Moscow by the Latvian authorities, with the intention to sell it. And I think it's now evident to everyone what the Kiev regime is really doing with the example of Kursk region. Here we should apply American laws themselves on the financing of terrorism. And right now, nowadays, it's Riga, Latvia themselves who should have received search orders, who should have received some kind of sentences for sponsoring terrorism, because that's exactly what it is. But since United States themselves are sponsoring terrorism, they're just going hand in hand. Is the Chinese media corporation with us today? For over 2 weeks, there are actions in the Kursk region, and the Wall Street Journal reported that the USA are not sharing with Kiev intelligence information for their goals on the Russian territory. But at the same time, another source of the Wall Street Journal reported that a large number of officers were recruited from the reserve. How would you comment on that? We've already commented on this in the introductory part. We have been speaking about it for a couple of years. United States, the United Kingdom, and the NATO country, but of course this is the Anglo-Saxon do it first and foremost, are not only those who came up with the idea and the inspiration, but they're the ones giving orders, the ones leading the Kiev regime to the targets on the Russian Federation. So their statements that it's taking place without the support of the West are nothing but blatant lies. Thank you. And the second question. 2 years after the explosions on the Nord Stream, Germany have issued the first arrest order for the suspected person. Russia officially voiced their complaints to Germany on the investigation of the explosion. Have you received the answer? No, I've already answered such a question. And it wasn't even an answer to a question, but I commented on the statement of Germany. We have not received anything from Germany, aside from not just baseless excuses, but some empty words fixed on paper that have nothing to do with this. It's just an excuse that we are conducting an investigation, but also repeatedly, at length, speaking about the fact that Germany is supposed to provide information, but they haven't been doing it. We've spoken about it at the UN Security Council, and like I said, over the last 24 hours, it has been repeated again. I would also like to say that Russia considers this attack on the object of critical infrastructure as a blatant act of international terrorism, which posed a colossal economical danger and a lot of damage. And unfortunately, not a single request of the Russian side on legal help with investigating this crime has been answered, and the investigation itself, which has been conducted for over 2 years, has not led to any feasible results. And by that I mean Germany. And non-compliance of the Germany side of the demands of legal help and the lack of effective investigation of the terrorist act goes against the obligations of Germany that we've already referred to, and Germany has to comply with this. Let us recall that the International Convention on Fighting Bombing Terrorism of 1997, the International Convention on Fighting Financing of Terrorism of 1999, the legal complaints have already been voiced to Germany, and we've already done it, and we demand a round of negotiations, which is a necessary condition before addressing to the International UN Court. And Berlin is trying to avoid these negotiations. As for recent publications of sending Germany to Poland demands on releasing Ukrainians who are accused of perpetrating this crime, Russian side hasn't been informed about these suspects, despite the fact that this information would be important for the investigation, especially by the Russian organs. We've also noticed that, according to the Polish procurator's office, one of the persons in this case, Ukrainian Volodymyr Z, was in fact on the Polish territory, but he managed to leave the country before Germany added his name to the list, and maybe it could be Zelensky. And Poland is another party to the aforementioned conventions and carries the same obligations on contributing to the investigation of the terrorist act on Nord Stream, perpetrating and identifying the perpetrators and bringing to justice these terrorists. And here, it's especially shocking, the recent statement of the Prime Minister Tusk, who demanded to shut up everyone who raises the issue of investigating the attack on the Nord Stream. And why so? I'm not even asking why the Prime Minister of Poland is speaking in such a tone and using such words. I'm merely interested where are the norms, the legal norms, acts or laws who prescribe not to speak about the crime and the punishment, especially perpetrated on an international scale. What exactly are they referring to? Or perhaps they just follow the rules-based world order and decide to continue speaking, but we will not leave it without attention. If you have no further question, is the Everelk with us? Good afternoon. I believe you've seen the recent statement of the press secretary of Minister of Foreign Affairs of Armenia about the words of Minister Lavrov. I would like to request that I see Varalk and not International Life on the screen, please. If you could please comment the statement that not a single point has been supported except for point 9, but also that the statement of the head of the foreign ministry of Russia not only poses regret, but also questions the constructive involvement of Russia in the process of settlement of relations between Armenia and Azerbaijan. Yes, we've seen the reactions of the Minister of Armenia, and this is another example of them trying to lay responsibility for their own mistakes, for their own shortfallings on other parties. Here it's Russia. And we see that their policy is dictated by the fact that they need to find someone to blame, no matter who it is, to blame for their own shortcomings. And then everything will be okay. I would like to recall you how point 9 sounds from November 9th, 2020. This is what Minister Lavrov was referring to. All economic transport connections will be unblocked. Armenia ensures the security between the transports between the Azerbaijan Republic and Nakhchivan Republic, including constant access of civilians, and this will be ensured by the services of the border regions of the FSB of Russia. And this was confirmed by the trilateral group on unblocking the transport chains in the Caucasus region, together with Russia, Azerbaijan, and Armenia. There have been 12 sessions, and there haven't been much progress. And they've decided not to connect the railway connection with the auto connection. They've enshrined the sovereignty and responsibility of parties, of routes going from the countries, and this was insisted by Yerevan themselves. So I hope that the statement that was posted, the statement that you've mentioned, that they have enough time to comment on that. We have regulated the transport control, but reaching any concrete agreement on the transport connections was hard, especially because Armenia was unwilling to agree. They stepped away from the principles. They've refused to accept the presence of Russians. They demanded that they not only stay present on the Armenian side, but also on the Azerbaijani side. And we still don't understand what they were referring to because I've just quoted the text of the agreement. So as for the point 9 of the trilateral agreement from November 11th, 2020, and I have to draw your attention, it was signed by the Prime Minister Pashinyan. Representatives of Armenia refused to organize the control of the trans-border services of FSB, and Armenia did not take any obligations as for the timeline of the negotiations. And then the Armenian authorities followed their new Western friends and practically freezed any kind of work in the trilateral group. So as for any practical results, as for unblocking communications and interests of Armenia, there were no results. Armenia once again follows the orders of the West, and instead of regulating transport connection with the neighbors in order to restore their own national economy, but also normalize the situation in the region as a whole. On our part, we stayed devoted to the statements of the highest level that have been reached between 2020 and 2022. This is the only true base for ensuring stability, security in South Caucasus. And we call on the Armenian authorities not to allow the West to let the years-long efforts to go in vain. And as you understand, this is especially relevant considering the US and the European obsession with driving a wedge between our relations with Armenia and other countries. Is Baku TV with us today? Good afternoon, Madam Zakharova. Baku TV. My question has to do with the recent state visit of the President, Mr. Putin, here to Baku. As you know, one of the issues that was up for discussion was the settlement between Azerbaijan and Yemen in line with the trilateral agreements. Alas, on the same dates that Vladimir Putin was in Baku, Armenian tried to start a provocation, especially shellings in Nakhichevan direction. I'd like to hear a comment on that. Yes, presidents of Russia and Azerbaijan spoke at length about this issue of peaceful settlement between Baku and Yerevan during the visit of our president to Azerbaijan. And I believe that you're aware because they've also spoken about it at the press conference, and all our efforts are in spirit with the allied relations both with Baku and Yerevan because we're connected with historical and cultural relations between our countries, and we want to ensure stable security in the region. As for the escalating tensions on the border, we call on both Yerevan and Baku to be calm and to avoid any actions that could further escalate the situation. All the questions should be settled peacefully in a political and diplomatic channel. Thank you. Is news.ru with us? Hello, Madam Zakharova. News.ru, Michael Rosen. We have 3 questions today. The question has to do with the previous one. Does Moscow have any plans to activize their mediating efforts in the Armenian-Azerbaijan settlement after the visit of President of Russia, Vladimir Putin, to Baku? The Russian leader has confirmed that he would be glad to help with the signature of peaceful agreement between Baku and Yerevan. I believe it's obvious that the conclusion of the peaceful agreement is the main condition of peaceful regulation, peaceful relations in the South Caucasus as a whole, and unwaveringly our country at every level spoke that we have high interest in this happening as soon as possible, and we're doing everything we can on a practical scale, and our readiness to continue to mediate the Armenian and Azerbaijani partners was confirmed by President personally in the aforementioned press conference, and the President has also spoken about his intention to speak with Prime Minister of Armenia after the visit of Azerbaijan, and we still are ready to help the sides on all these sides of the trilateral agreements at the highest level of 2020-2022. And beside the peaceful agreement, this package of agreements also includes issue of delimitation and demarcation of borders, unblocking of transport communications, as well as development of contacts between the civil society. And of course, we welcome the efforts of our neighbors, such as Kazakhstan, on this area. And another question: do the efforts continue to open in South Caucasus new political front against Russia continue? Armenian mass media report on the visit of the French President Emmanuel Macron to Armenia in a month on September 21st. Meanwhile, Yerevan once again refuses to take part in the new trainings of CSTO. The so-called Russophobic efforts of the West are not going anywhere, We've already spoken with clear examples of the destructive action of the Westerners in the region, and we've spoken at length. We gave an extensive answer at the briefing on July 18th, and this is the same paradigm that they will follow during the visit of President Macron to Armenia. As for participation of Armenia in the CSTO events, the doors for the Republic to return, or maybe we should use another word for it. I don't know what kind of word we should use here. Let's say to the full-fledged return of the Republic. The doors are open because ultimately there are alternatives of STO, and Russia as a guarantee for stability simply doesn't exist.
That's been proven by centuries. It is appreciated by the Armenian people, and it is recorded in the Armenian history. That is not to be rewritten despite all these pseudo textbooks. Another question: what is Moscow's take on the Azerbaijan decision to file a bid to join BRICS? That's what I started my briefing with. I took stock of Russia's chairship within BRICS, the pinnacle of which is BRICS summit in Kazan. I also answered the question in a comprehensive way on how we treat this issue, and there's not the position of our country alone, but of the whole BRICS family regarding our take to many applications, bids, and voices in favor of joining or interacting with BRICS in one way or another. That's how I started my briefing. I would not repeat. Thank you. Thank you. Rudov, it's been a while since we last saw you.
I'm with you from Kurdistan, Iraq, from Rudov Media Network. I have questions in regard of the normalization attempts by Turkish and Syrian authorities in regard of normalizing the relations. My first question is, I have 5 questions, and my first one is, how do you see the current attempts by Turkey and Syrian officials for normalizing their relations?
You know, as we see it, Turkey and Syria see rebuilding interstate relations as one of the primary tasks, and the messages that they are ready to do that are sent from both capitals, including at the highest level. From our part, we also believe that bringing relations back on track between Ankara and Damascus is extremely important to advance a comprehensive Syrian settlement and strengthening regional security. Let me remind you that in 2023, Moscow organized a whole range of meetings within the trilateral format, including Russia, Iran, Syria, and Turkey, including at the level of foreign ministers and their deputies, defense ministers, and heads of security services. As we see it, a very good framework was set in place for the development of dialogue, leading to the discussion of the whole range of issues to improving Turkey-Syria relations at the high and summit levels. We seek to further closely coordinate for the benefit of rebuilding interstate relations between Ankara and Damascus, primarily with the participants of the Astana format that proved itself to be efficient and relevant more than once.
In 2024, have you been involving in those attempts for normalizing the relations? I mean, in 2024.
As I've already said, in our country, in Moscow, we had a range of events attended by Turkey and Syria. It gives them an opportunity to have contacts indirectly in the framework of the multilateral forum, and among other things, we support dialogue between the two capitals, and basically we contribute to normalizing relations between the two countries.
Really appreciating your answers, and you answered 2 other of my questions from what you said. My last question is, do you have any demands or any suggestions for those 2 countries in the way that they try to normalize their relations?
Well, countries that... Are you talking about Turkey and Syria in particular, or just countries in general?
I'm talking about Turkey and Syria.
You know, from the outset, we've been saying that attempts to isolate Syria, to exclude it from regional entities, not to talk to Damascus, were a mistake. And as early as 2015, 2016, we predicted that everything will get back on track. Both Damascus, Syria, will cooperate with neighboring states, with regional states, or will reinstate or rebuild relations with many countries that refused to do so a decade ago. It was obvious because the whole story around Syria and the whole conflict was man-made, and it was fueled in many ways by the collective West. That is why it was obvious that Russia will not allow Syria to fall under the pressure of the West. And Russia will provide assistance in combating international terrorism, and hence Russia will make sure that contacts between Syria and countries that turned their back on it temporarily will be reinstated. Thank you. The Moscow Post, are you here with us? Yes, we have 3 questions today. Hello to you. Regarding attempts to introduce regarding the armed forces of Ukraine in the Kursk region, have journalists requested accreditation from the foreign ministry, and has there been a response on this terrorist attack by the CSTO and the SEO? Are you talking, what kind of journalists are you talking about? Are these journalists that were currently accused of trespassing? No, they have not asked for visas or accreditation. If you are talking about foreign journalists in principle that are located near the region or in the area, indeed there are a great number of foreign journalists who are working legally, and we urge all foreign journalists, not only do we urge them, but we insist that they abide by the Russian legislation. If you're a foreigner, you need to have a visa and an accreditation for sure. In any case, if you represent a foreign media, you need to have a foreign ministry accreditation. Those journalists who crossed Russian border illegally have not requested any accreditation from the foreign ministry. As for the response by the CSTO and the CSO, friendly countries of ours are closely monitoring the developments in the Kursk region, and they note comprehensive measures taken by our country to protect the lives of civilians and to mitigate another terrorist attack of the Nazi regime in Kiev. All member states of the Shanghai Cooperation Organization that also include the participants to the CSTO